Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, well, an incredible journey, really, spanning millennia and continents. We're going to discover how human creativity, how culture have profoundly shaped the spaces and, the objects all around us.
That's right. It's a truly fascinating collection of sources you've pulled together. We're going from the absolute birth of civilization right up to the revolutionary designs of the 20th century.
Quite the range.
It is. And our mission, really, in this deep dive is to pull out those vital nuggets of insight and hopefully show you the surprising threads, the connections between these, well, vastly different eras.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this rich material. We're going to travel through time, starting right at the foundations, then moving into periods of dramatic rebirth, grandeur, before landing in the world of modern simplicity and, well, some pretty revolutionary design thinking. So let's cast our minds back, way back, to what's often called the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. That land nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. When you look at this foundational period, what truly stands out for you?
What's truly fascinating here is how the environment itself shaped society. It wasn't just a backdrop. Think about those rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Unpredictable, prone to devastating floods, but also severe droughts.
Right, a challenging place to build a civilization.
Exactly. And that forced early humans to cooperate on a massive scale. Building and maintaining those complex irrigation systems, those networks of canals, it wasn't just about getting water to crops. It directly influenced the birth of organized government, of laws. It's this profound connection.
So it's like the technology, the irrigation drove the social structure.
Precisely. It set the stage for so much that followed. You see this primal link between environment, technology, and how societies organize themselves.
That's a powerful idea. So not just practical survival, but establishing those foundational social contracts. I imagine that land, rich but challenging in the Eastern Fertile Crescent, it must have attracted a lot of attention, a lot of conflict. Oh, absolutely. Tribes constantly fought for control. And as you said, the irregular water supply wasn't just a problem, it was an impetus for innovation. Those canals transformed the land, allowed for abundant harvests. And that collective effort, well, it fostered the need for governance. Over centuries, you see these empires rise and fall: Sumerians, Akkadians, Neo-Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, all built on these very foundations.
And their spiritual world, polytheistic, right? Thousands of gods. Did that sense of environmental chaos or maybe control reflect in their deities?
Absolutely. It's deeply intertwined. Early gods were often direct personifications of nature itself. And the sky god. Enlil, the wind and flood god, you can feel the river anxieties there. But as society got more complex, the gods evolved too. By the 3rd millennium BCE, they're seen as powerful cosmic rulers, later even given roles like parents, and figures like Inanna or Ishtar, the goddess of fertility but also war. Her cult spread incredibly widely, a really dynamic figure.
And central to their religious practice were the ziggurats, these massive step structures. They must have dominated the landscape. They really must have. Imagine them. Stepped mountains of brick-covered earth. They weren't just temples. They were literal and symbolic anchors. In a world often at the mercy of unpredictable rivers, these towering structures, built through immense collective effort. They symbolized a kind of mastery, a connection to the cosmic rulers they believed controlled their fate, a meeting place for gods and humans, with the gods' court right at the very top, a statement of order.
It sounds like that sense of organization, that hierarchy, really permeated their earthly society too, their governance. How did leadership evolve there?
It did. Government progressed. You start with the local EN, who was like a high priest, both spiritual and administrative. Then you get the ENSI, a governor, and finally the Lugal, the great man, the king. And kingship wasn't just about power. It required a divine mandate, chosen by heaven. Their authority was visually reinforced: the crown, the throne, the scepter.
And supported by a whole structure underneath.
A vast hierarchy, yes. Priests, judiciary, military, palace staff, scribes, architects, sculptors, all working to maintain that order.
Which brings us to the Code of Hammurabi, perhaps the most famous artifact from that time. World's oldest legal code, essentially.
It's certainly one of the most significant. Hammurabi's stated mission was to crush the evildoer and protect the weak from the strong. What's really striking is its structure that if X happens, then Y is the penalty format. Very clear. But even more revealing, penalties often varied by social class. It explicitly reinforced the existing social order, a remarkable window into their values.
Speaking of structures in society, I'm curious about how they presented themselves. Let's talk fashion. How did Mesopotamian attire compare to, say, ancient Egypt?
Well, it was generally more colorful, for starters. They primarily used wool and linen. Silk came much later with the Persians. A key garment, especially early on for Sumerians, Assyrians, Babylonians, both sexes, was the konakis.
Konakis.
Yeah, basically skirts made with these twisted tufts of wool or flax, or sometimes fringed borders. They must have had a very distinctive texture, a real sense of movement. Later, men's costumes evolved into more tailored tunics, often with sleeves.
And you mentioned Queen Poppy's headdress earlier. Sounds incredibly elaborate.
Oh, it was spectacular, a masterpiece. Gold leaves, strings of lapis lazuli and carnelian beads, topped with this large gold comb. It really speaks to their wealth and skill in metalworking. And a fascinating social detail, Assyrian law actually required married women to wear veils in public, a practice with long echoes, obviously.
Interesting. What about hair and grooming?
Hair and beards were generally worn long, often intricately curled. For men of status, sometimes even interwoven with gold thread, very elaborate. Men's headgear ranged from simple caps to more ornate, fez-shaped tiaras or mitres for kings. And the Persians, coming from colder regions, introduced things like tailored coats and, interestingly, distinct right and left shoes. A small thing, but significant for comfort.
Right and left shoes, that is a detail. And the Phrygian cap.
Yes, that soft felt cap they wore. Centuries later, it was adopted by French revolutionaries as a symbol of liberty, a surprising connection across time.
Truly amazing. Okay, let's shift to their artistic expression. Sumerian art, the work of vase, the standard of Why are these pieces so important?
The work of vase is essentially a visual narrative. Its 3 registers, or bands, depict their agricultural world's staple commodities being offered up to a goddess. It tells a story. The standard of is just beautiful, a mosaic of shell and lapis lazuli, but it's also a powerful record of their social order, division of labor. It uses that composite view figure shown partly in profile, partly frontally, which is typical of early art. Then you have things like the bull-headed lyre, showing that early imaginative blending of human and animal forms, likely for symbolic reasons. And of course, cuneiform, their wedge-shaped writing on clay tablets, monumental for record-keeping, for transmitting culture.
And the Akkadians followed, right, with a stronger focus on military power. How did their art reflect that?
Very much so. The stele of Naram-Sin is a perfect example. It's his powerful narrative relief celebrating a military victory. Naram-Sin himself is depicted larger than everyone else, wearing a horned helmet, a clear symbol of his divine status and power. Very different feel. Then, with the Neo-Sumerians, you see a shift back slightly. The statue of Gudea, for instance, is solid, realistic in the face, but conveys this quiet dignity and reverence.
And the Babylonians, known for Hammurabi's code, the stele itself is quite artistic, isn't it?
It is. It visually reinforces the divine source of the law. You see Hammurabi receiving the laws from the seated sun god Shamash. The text of the laws is inscribed below, art serving state power. Assyrian art, though, really doubles down on power. Especially their carved stone reliques. They emphasize physical strength, military might, lots of scenes of war, pillage, royal hunts.
Brutal stuff sometimes.
Can be. Yet there's also this surprisingly tender realism sometimes, like in the depiction of an injured lioness. It shows their artistic range wasn't just propaganda. And then you have the Lamassu, those iconic, immense winged, human-headed bulls, often with 5 legs.
5 legs. Why 5?
It's a clever visual trick. From the front, you see 2 legs, making them look stable, steadfast. From the side, you see 4, suggesting movement and power. They were symbols of the king's might, guarding gateways. Truly formidable. The Persians, in contrast, really excelled at metalworking. Intricate gold vessels, exquisite craftsmanship, both functional and beautiful.
Let's talk about building things. Their architecture. Mostly sun-baked mud brick, right? That must have posed challenges.
It certainly did. Mud brick isn't the most durable material, especially with floods. They used bitumen natural asphalt as an adhesive and waterproofing agent. Reeds were also vital for boats, houses, reinforcements. The ziggurats, like the one at were incredible feats of engineering. Massive solid structures built without internal supports or centering, just layered brick. Babylon, well, it boasted the magnificent Ishtar Gate, covered in those vibrant blue glazed bricks, decorated with white and yellow dragons and bulls, a real statement piece. And of course, the fabled Hanging Gardens, one of the wonders of the ancient world, though their exact nature is still debated.
And the Assyrians focused on fortified cities.
Yes, massive walled citadels, often guarded by those imposing Lamassu we mentioned. Architecture is defense and intimidation.
While the Persians at Persepolis, that sounds like it was on another scale altogether.
Persepolis was breathtaking. built by Darius I and Xerxes. Its audience hall, the Apadana, could supposedly hold 10,000 guests. Imagine forests of 65-foot columns topped with these elaborate bold capitals. And significantly, unlike the Assyrian reliefs full of war, Persepolis depicted processions of tribute bearers from across the empire, offerings, not conquest, symbolizing a different kind of power, vast, ordered, peaceful submission. Architecturally, they embraced arches, corbelled roofs, and extensive use of inlay and glazed tiles for decoration. Incredibly rich surfaces.
So what were their homes and palaces actually like inside? How did they live?
Palaces often had distinct zones, outer public courtyards, inner private ones, offices, workshops, living quarters. Walls could be decorated with paintings or those sculpted reliefs. Colors came from natural pigments. White from gypsum, bright yellows, that stunning lapis lazuli, blue from copper oxide or the stone itself, red from iron oxide, black from lampblack or bitumen. Mosaics, like on the standard of Ur, used bitumen as glue for the shell and lapis pieces. Glass was used too, especially in blue, imitating lapis for vases, perfume bottles, even inlaid eyes on statues.
And ordinary houses.
Often closely packed together in neighborhoods. Usually rectangular rooms arranged around a central open courtyard helped keep things cool in the heat. Kitchens might be in the courtyard with a hearth. Storage was in large jars, often lined with bitumen. Furniture was pretty minimal, honestly. Built-in mud brick benches were common. Simple chairs and tables from palm wood, maybe reed armchairs. The wealthy might have high wooden beds, but the poor likely slept on mats. Interiors were generally kept dark to stay cool, lit by simple clay lamps burning oil or bitumen.
Okay, from those ancient foundations, let's take a huge leap forward, a period of incredible rebirth, explosive artistic innovation in Italy, the Italian Renaissance.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting, as you say. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was fundamentally about rediscovering classical Greek and Roman culture after what they saw as the decline of the Middle Ages. But crucially, it wasn't just a copy-paste revival. It was a new birth, fueled by a completely fresh outlook on nature, on humanity, on the universe itself. We're talking roughly 1400 to 1600 here.
And Florence seems absolutely central to this, the crucible of change.
Absolutely. Florence was this vibrant, cultured hub. And you can't talk about Florence without mentioning the Medici family. They were powerful bankers, but also unparalleled patrons of the arts. Figures like Cosimo the Elder and later his grandson Lorenzo the Magnificent. They were instrumental. Their influence was immense. They even produced 4 popes and 2 queens regent of France. Catherine and Marie de Medici shows their reach.
So power shifts from the church more towards secular forces, city-states, wealthy families funded by banking and trade, and humanism comes in.
Precisely. Humanism was revolutionary. It put the emphasis on the individual's potential to learn, discover, achieve greatness in this life. A huge contrast to the medieval focus on the afterlife.
Yeah.
Religiously, this was also a time of turmoil, growing criticism of the Catholic Church, its perceived corruption, its extravagance, which eventually led figures like Martin Luther to challenge practices like selling indulgences. His stand in 1517 really kicked off the Reformation, leading to Protestantism, a massive shift.
Politically, Florence had this republican government, dominated by merchants who valued individual merit. But the Medici, they held the reins, didn't they?
They did, skillfully. Originally wealthy wool merchants and bankers, they became the de facto rulers for about 2 centuries. Cosimo, then Lorenzo. They essentially ruled as dictators, but were careful to maintain the appearance of an elected government. That balance of power and perception is key to understanding the era.
Okay, let's talk fashion. Italian Renaissance. I'm seeing a big shift from flowing, draped garments to much more fitted, structured styles. What's behind that?
It's a major change. Tailoring really comes into its own. Clothes gain structure, become stiffer. You get the first real templates for what we might recognize as modern clothing. Men wearing hose with a doublet, maybe an outer coat. Women adopting a distinct bodice with a separate skirt. And this isn't just about looks. It kind of echoes humanism itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Emphasizing individual body parts, allowing for distinct expression. It mirrors the new focus on the individual, move away from the more communal drapes of the medieval period.
Interesting connection. So what were the key looks?
For men, it was about accentuating a strong silhouette. Wide shoulders, sometimes padded. Prominent codpieces, can't ignore those. Strong legs shown off by hose. Fitted waistcoats, pleated overcoats called giornia, often with big puffy sleeves. Rich fabrics like brocade. Caps and berets were popular headwear. Women emphasized narrow waists, contrasting with wide shoulders and full skirts. Bodices were often deeply pointed. Gowns like the Gamora or Gonella were tight-fitting, often low-necked, and they had distinctive headdresses like the balzo, that sort of donut-shaped roll.
All right, the art. Renaissance art truly marks a new era. More than just reviving classical forms, it seems like a radical rethinking.
It absolutely was. Artists weren't just seen as craftsmen anymore, they're intellectuals, even scientists, exploring visual problems. This is where you get the development of mathematical or linear perspective. The idea that a flat surface could be a window onto a believable 3D world. Game-changing. They also advanced aerial perspective, making distant objects look less distinct, hazier, bluer. Subject matter exploded, too. Sacred scenes, yes, but rendered with classical balance. Detailed studies of plants, animals, human anatomy became crucial. And they embraced classical Roman mythological themes, Bacchus, Venus, springtime.
And the techniques themselves evolved rapidly. Impasto, chiaroscuro, sfumato. These terms are still fundamental.
Right. Impasto applying paint thickly so you see the brushstrokes, giving texture. Chiaroscuro using strong contrast between light and dark to create volume and drama. Think of how it makes figures pop. Foreshortening, depicting objects at an angle so they seem to recede into space realistically. And sfumato, that technique Leonardo da Vinci perfected. It means gone up in smoke. Soft, hazy transitions between colors and tones creates mystery, depth. Think Mona Lisa's smile. And contrapposto became huge. That pose where the figure's weight is on one foot, creating a natural S-curve in the body. It looks relaxed, realistic, embodying that new interest in human anatomy.
Sculpture. Figures like Donatello, Michelangelo immediately spring to mind. What made their work so revolutionary?
Donatello's Bronze David was a watershed moment. The first freestanding nude statue of the Renaissance, and the first large bronze cast in the round since antiquity. Its realism, that youthful confidence, a total break from medieval norms. And Michelangelo, well, the Pietà Christ, in Mary's lap the emotion is so profound yet restrained, and his David, the embodiment of the heroic ideal, anatomically perfect, intensely focused. He also designed the dome for St. Peter's Basilica, a staggering architectural achievement.
Painting is often divided into early, high, and then mannerism. Can you walk us through the differences?
Sure, the early Renaissance, centered mainly in Siena and Florence, laid the groundwork. Think of Giotto, moving away from icon-like figures towards more human reactions. Then Masaccio, he really brought figures to life with light and shadow, chiaroscuro, making them feel solid, three-dimensional. His use of linear perspective was groundbreaking. Fra Angelico brought this serene, spiritual quality. Botticelli, famous for linear grace in mythological scenes like the birth of Venus and Primavera. Piero della Francesca, a real master of perspective and geometry.
And the high Renaissance sounds like the peak.
It's often seen that way. A culmination of talent, centered now more in Rome as well as Florence and Venice, noble expression, dramatic compositions, mastery of techniques. Leonardo da Vinci, master of sfumato and chiaroscuro. Think Mona Lisa, The Last Supper. Incredible psychological depth. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling frescoes, The Creation of Adam, just monumental, heroic figures. Raphael Sanzio, known for clarity, harmony, ease of composition. The School of Athens is a perfect example. Giorgione and Titian in Venice brought richness of color.
Then comes mannerism. What defines that late phase?
Mannerism, emerging in the later Renaissance, gets more complex, sometimes intentionally unsettling. You see elongated figures, dramatic diagonal compositions, often unusual perspectives. The harmony and balance of the high Renaissance are sort of questioned, twisted. The Venetian school, with artists like Tintoretto, known as Il Furioso for his speed and dramatic flair, and Veronese with his huge, vibrant canvases full of figures, really pushed color and complex compositions.
Architecture also went through phases, fully embracing classical ideals, but in new ways. What were the general characteristics?
Symmetry was key. Order, balance. They used ashlar masonry, smooth, squared stones, often rusticated, rough-hewn, on the ground floor for a sense of strength. Horizontal lines were emphasized with cornices and balustrades. Doors and windows got classical treatments, architraves, pediments. Vaulted ceilings, often without ribs, became common, as did domes on drums, frequently frescoed inside. They used the classical orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, sometimes just decoratively on facades, sometimes structurally in arcades. Buildings were often clearly divided into stories by horizontal bands, very rational, very structured.
And the typical buildings, palazzos, villas.
The typical city palazzo was imposing, usually 3 or 4 stories, ground floor for entrance, services, maybe stables. Second floor was the piano nobile, the main level with formal salons, bedrooms. Upper floors had lower ceilings, more living spaces, then servants' quarters at the very top. Country villas were often more spread out, maybe 2 or 3 levels, designed to connect with the landscape, with gardens becoming increasingly important.
And who are the key architects driving this?
Filippo Brunelleschi is often considered the pioneer. His dome for the Florence Cathedral was an incredible engineering feat built without traditional centering. Revolutionary. He also designed the Ospedale degli Innocenti with its elegant loggia. Michelotto designed the influential Palazzo Medici. In the High Renaissance, Donato Bramante brought classical ideals to Rome, designing the Tempietto and the initial Greek cross plan for St. Peter's Basilica. Michelangelo also worked on St. Peter's and designed the dynamic Capitoline Hill complex.
Then mannerism creeps into architecture too.
Yes, it brought more complexity, sometimes ambiguity, playing with classical rules. Andrea Palladio is hugely important here, deeply influenced by Roman and Greek architecture, but highly innovative. His villas, like Villa Caprella Rotonda, with its 4 identical porticos, were incredibly influential, especially later in England and America. Overall, Renaissance architecture focused on creating harmonious spaces for aristocrats and churches, often based on mathematical proportions, integrating gardens and sculpture. Mannerism added a layer of sophistication, sometimes tension, that paved the way for the Baroque.
And the interiors and furniture must have mirrored this evolution, from classical simplicity to mannerist complexity.
Absolutely. Early Renaissance interiors were also about symmetry and order. Walls might be relatively simple, maybe neutral plaster or patterned or frescoed with narrative scenes. Floors were often checkerboard brick or geometric tile or richer marble and terrazzo. Ceilings were important, often beamed or coffered, sunken panels, painted with rich colors, geometric patterns, even mythological scenes. Brunelleschi's S. Lorenzo Nave shows that clean, classical structure. The Palazzo Davanzati gives a great sense of domestic interiors with tiled floors and frescoes. High Renaissance interiors became more florid, more decorated, and mannerism. Well, you get spaces like the Sala dei Giganti at Palazzo del Te, where swirling frescoes cover literally everything: walls, ceiling, making you feel like you're inside the painting. Immense drama.
Wow. And the furniture itself, what defined the look?
Renaissance furniture was generally monumental, architectural, often quite ornate. It was built to last, often from walnut. You see decorative nail heads used, especially on leather upholstery. Upholstered seats become more common. Pieces were often painted with gesso and gilded. Key types include the Dante and Savonarola chairs, both X-frame folding chairs, though Savonarola often had more slats. The sedilla was a more massive armchair, often heavily carved, sometimes with leather bands. The scabeo and pancetto were 3-legged stools or side chairs, often with elaborate carved backs. The cassone is hugely important, a large ornamented chest, often for a bride's dowry. The casapanca combined a chest with a bench back. Credenzas served as sideboards. Beds were massive structures, paneled head and footboards, sometimes with canopies, and decoration techniques like intarsia, inlaid with mosaic, pastiglia, raised plaster ornament, and surdecina, inlaying bone or ivory into dark wood, added layers of luxury. Accessories like colorful majolica pottery and bronze statuettes were also common.
Okay, from the intellectual rigor and rebirth of the Renaissance, we plunge into the drama and dynamism of the Italian Baroque. How does this period distinguish itself? What drove it?
The very word Baroque, possibly from the Portuguese Barroco for an imperfect pearl, kind of hints at it. It suggests something irregular, maybe excessive, definitely a departure from the strict classical rules of the Renaissance. It kicks off in Rome around 1600, spreads through Europe, and it's characterized by complex curves, dynamism, vigor, splendor, theatricality, pure drama.
And what fueled this dramatic shift?
It was largely a direct reaction to the Protestant Reformation, which had significantly weakened the Catholic Church's authority. The Counter-Reformation saw the Church actively using art and architecture as powerful tools to inspire awe, to draw people back, to stimulate strong spiritual and emotional reactions. The goal was to emphasize faith through powerful feeling, through spectacle, not just through reason or intellect. Art became a weapon in a spiritual battle, aiming to overwhelm the senses and reaffirm Catholic doctrine, defined by the Council of Trent.
So art becomes almost evangelistic, serving the Church's agenda in a very visible, emotional way. What was happening politically must have been turbulent.
Oh, very much so. Think of figures like Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor in the first half of the 16th century. He inherited this vast empire, Spain, Austria, parts of Italy, the Low Countries, but he spent his reign struggling against the rise of Protestantism, pressure from the Ottoman Empire, wars with France, even hostility from the Pope at times. His eventual abdication, splitting his domains between his son and brother, really highlights the political fragmentation and intense pressures of the era, which definitely impacted artistic patronage.
And fashion in the Baroque. Did Italy keep its dominance?
Actually, no. Italian fashion influence started to wane a bit. Spanish styles, with their stiff formality and magnificence, became quite influential across Europe for a time. Then, around the 1620s-30s, you see a shift. The really rigid Spanish farthingale disappears for women. Silhouettes become a bit softer, bulkier, with higher waists and much fuller sleeves, often slaffed to show fabric underneath. Men wore things like melon-shaped upper stocks or breeches, dark doublets, opulent velvet mantles, often trimmed with fur. Hats were still important. Women's dresses were often three parts: a bodice, a petticoat, and an overgown. Bodices remained quite stiff and pointed, but the skirt flowed more naturally, though still full, without the rigid bell shape of the farthingale.
The art of the Baroque, it's known for intense movement, drama, and that powerful use of light and shadow, right?
Absolutely. Those are the hallmarks. Asymmetrical compositions, dynamic movement, strong, often theatrical lighting chiaroscuro taken to extremes, and highly dramatic interpretations of subjects. In painting, you get revolutionary figures like Caravaggio. He used ordinary people as models for religious figures, placed them in contemporary settings, and used that stark contrast of light and dark tenebrism to create incredibly immediate, powerful scenes. Think The Calling of Matthew, almost like a spotlight effect. Rembrandt, the Dutch master, developed his own signature lighting, that softer, graded transition from light to dark, creating psychological depth. Think The Night Watch. Jan Vermeer, the little Dutch master, focused on intimate domestic scenes, often women, bathed in the serene, beautiful light, girl with a pearl earring. Exquisite. And Pietro da Cortona, a high Baroque painter and architect, created these vast, swirling ceiling frescoes, like the one in the Palazzo Barberini that seemed to burst through the architecture. Pure illusionistic spectacle.
And Baroque sculpture is almost synonymous with one name, Gian Lorenzo Bernini. What made him so pivotal?
Bernini is the Italian Baroque in sculpture, and largely in architecture too. He had this incredible energy, technical virtuosity, and deep understanding of psychology and drama. He completely transformed things like the portrait bust, making marble seem alive. His fountains are dynamic explosions of water and sculpture. His tombs are theatrical stages. His Ecstasy of Santa Teresa is maybe the ultimate Baroque statement. Marble figures seemingly floating, bathed in divine light from a hidden window. The emotion is palpable, theatrical. It pulls you right into the spiritual experience. In his architectural work at St. Peter's, the massive bronze baldachin under the dome, the vast colonnade embracing the piazza, it's all about grandeur, movement, and engaging the viewer on an emotional level. Baroque art overall really broke free, playing with figures, space, light, and shadow to create maximum impact.
Architecture, too, moved away from Renaissance restraint towards something much more dynamic, more sculptural.
Definitely. Originating in Italy, early 17th century, is characterized by a free, almost sculptural use of classical elements, columns, pediments, but twisted, broken, layered. Dynamic interplay of convex and concave curves, ovals instead of circles, dramatic combinations of architecture, sculpture, painting. There's a definite preference for curves, double curves, diagonal lines that imply movement. You see things like flying figures seemingly holding up structures, scrolled volutes, complex ground plans, open and broken pediments where the top triangle is literally split open, and those twisted Solomonic columns add to the sense of motion. It's architecture designed to impress, overwhelm, engage emotionally.
So who are the key architects creating this, and where can we see it best?
Carlo Maderno was crucial early on. His facade for Santa Susanna in Rome really set the tone dynamic, layered. He also completed the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. Bernini, as we said, designed the St. Peter's Square colonnade, a masterpiece of spatial manipulation. Later, Baroque saw activity spread. In Rome, Nicolas Alvi created the spectacular Trevi Fountain, a fusion of sculpture and architecture. Francesco de Sanctis designed the dramatic Spanish steps. Francesco Borrelli was maybe the most original, even eccentric. His use of undulating walls, complex geometry, manipulating space and mass. Look at San Carlo al Quattro Fontane, truly inventive. In Venice, Baldassare Longhena designed the magnificent S. Maria della Salute, that great octagonal church dominating the entrance to the Grand Canal. And Giacomo Vignola's Church of Il Gesù, the mother church of the Jesuits, is often called the first truly Baroque facade, highly influential.
And the interiors and furniture must have followed suit, all drama and opulence.
Absolutely. Baroque interiors were all about fluid design, strong contrasts, bold ornamentation, and creating illusions of limitless space. Color, light, and shadow, sculptural details were paramount. These were spaces designed for the wealthy and powerful royalty. The church saw elaboration, ostentation were the norm. Techniques like quadratura, painting illusionistic architecture on walls and ceilings to extend the real space, were popular. And di sotto in su, meaning seen from below, those ceiling frescoes where figures seem to float in the sky above you, like Pietro da Cortona's Barberini ceiling. Breathtaking effects.
And the furniture itself, what defined the Baroque look?
Grand, robust, full of carving and movement. Legs were often elaborately turned, bulbous shapes, ball-shaped scrolls. Cabinet forms often featured curves, bulges, reflecting the architectural preference for dynamism. Carving was everywhere: acanthus leaves, shells, figures, patouti cherubs, allegorical scenes, coats of arms. Architectural elements like moldings, pilasters, columns were incorporated into furniture design. There was a Spanish influence seen in things like black and white painted cabinets, often decorated with bone or ivory inlay, certecina. Lots of lacquer, heavy gilding, and even chinoiserie. European interpretations of Chinese motifs started to appear as an exotic touch. Proportions could sometimes feel a bit heavy or awkward compared to later, more refined French styles, but the impact was undeniable.
Were there any special decorative techniques that stand out?
Yes, definitely. Pietra d'Or, or pietra dura, was incredibly luxurious. This involved creating intricate pictures or patterns using precisely cut, inlaid panels of colored marbles, hard minerals, and semi-precious stones: agate, amethyst, jasper, lapis lazuli. Used for tabletops, cabinet fronts. Developed mainly in Florence and Milan. Exquisite work. Another technique was scagliola. This was a clever imitation marble made from plaster mixed with powdered stone and pigments, then polished to a high sheen. Much cheaper than real marble or pietra d'or, but could create very convincing and elaborate inlays, often used for tabletops or commodes.
Okay, let's fast forward again. A fascinating interlude in Germany, Biedermeier, followed by the huge leaps of modernism. How does Biedermeier fit in, and what defines that radical shift to modernism?
It's a great juxtaposition because it really highlights how styles reflect their time and their intended audience. Biedermeier, emerging in the early 19th century, was specifically for the growing middle class. It's this beautiful example of practical elegance, comfort, function over showiness. Then, modernism blows everything up. It completely redefines design for the new machine age, grappling with industrialization, new materials, and this ideal of serving all people, not just the elite.
Let's start with German Biedermeier, early 19th century. You said it's simpler than the French Empire style it corresponds with.
That's right. It's contemporary with Regency in England and federal in the U.S., but Biedermeier is Germany and Austria's interpretation. And yes, significantly simpler, more restrained than the Napoleonic grandeur of empire. Interestingly, the name Biedermeier came from a satirical cartoon character poking fun of bourgeois coziness. But the style itself emphasized simple, practical forms with a quiet elegance. It was designed for comfortable, everyday middle-class living.
So characteristics would be smaller scale, maybe, graceful forms, clean lines.
Exactly. Clean, simple lines, honest, functional forms. It consciously avoided unnecessary embellishment. The beauty came from the wood itself, often beautiful veneers of lighter woods, especially later on. Early Biedermeier might still use dark mahogany, echoing empire, but the classic look features paler woods like birch, maple, grained ash, pear wood, often with a distinctive pale yellowish finish. Marquetry inlaid wood patterns was used, but often subtly.
And furniture details, seating.
Seating was generally upholstered for comfort. Velvet was popular, sometimes striped fabrics. Matching the upholstery to the drapery was a common trend, creating a very cohesive, snug interior feel. The Klismos chair form, with those elegant outward curving legs, was a characteristic shape and a key identifier. Biedermeier furniture generally lacks ormolu mounts, those gilded bronze decorations you see all over empire pieces. While usually graceful, proportions could sometimes be a little bit sturdy, maybe slightly awkward, but the overall feel is charming and unpretentious. It started in southern Germany and spread into Austria, becoming very popular.
Okay, now for the big one, modernism. Roughly 1920 to 1950, though its roots go earlier and influence later. This sounds like a fundamental rethink.
It truly was a radical departure. A core ideal, especially early on, was that design should serve the needs of all people, treating users as equals, democratizing design in a way. This resonated strongly in places like the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Britain, and it grew directly out of the realities of the first machine age. Telephones, electric light, mass travel, new materials like steel and reinforced concrete. Designers felt they needed a new aesthetic, a new vocabulary, appropriate for this industrial world, no more just copying historical styles.
And pioneers like Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, they essentially forged this new language.
They were absolutely pivotal architects, but their influence extended to interiors, furniture, even city planning. Their ideas shaped decades of design thinking. And this was happening as a backdrop of huge upheaval, World War I, the Great Depression, the dawn of the atomic age. They believed rational design could offer solutions, improve lives in a rapidly changing, often frightening world.
It's interesting you mentioned even religion had a modernist movement, reinterpreting teachings in light of science, like Darwinism.
Yes, Roman Catholic modernism tried to reconcile faith with modern thought, calling for freedom of conscience. It just shows how pervasive this spirit of questioning, of seeking new interpretations, was across society, not just in art and design.
Fashion also saw artists getting involved, looking forward, not back.
Definitely. Artists like Sonia Delaunay, Russian-born but working in France, created textiles and garments using bold geometric forms, bright colors, asymmetrical designs. Very avant-garde. You also see early examples of purely functional modern clothing, like the tutu coverall or the Arbeitsanzug worksuit by Molinaki at the Bauhaus. Form follows function applied to clothing. And even leisure wear became more relaxed, like silk beach pajamas. New freedoms, new comforts.
And art movements like Dadaism and Surrealism seem to reflect the chaos and subconscious exploration of the times.
Absolutely. Dadaism, born out of the trauma of World War I, deliberately ridiculed established culture and values. It was anti-art, absurdist, nihilistic in some ways, but also a cry against the senselessness they saw. Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, like the Mona Lisa with the mustache, LHOQ, are iconic examples. Surrealism, starting in the 1920s, drew heavily on Freud's ideas about the subconscious. Dreamlike imagery, irrational juxtapositions. Think Salvador Dali's melting clocks, the persistence of memory, or Frida Kahlo's deeply personal, symbolic self-portraits, exploring the inner world.
Post-World War II, New York becomes a center with abstract expressionism.
Yes, a major shift in the art world's center of gravity. ABEX was about expressing raw emotion and energy directly onto, often large canvases, not objectively. Jackson Pollock's drip paintings are the famous example of this action painting. Mark Rothko explored the emotional power of pure color in his vast atmospheric canvases. Willem de Kooning merged abstraction with fierce figuration. Then, by mid-century, pop art emerges, reacting against ABEX's seriousness. It embraces images and objects from popular commercial culture. Andy Warhol's soup cans and Marilyn Monroe prints, Roy Lichtenstein's comic book panels, critiquing and celebrating mass culture simultaneously. And op art played with geometric abstraction to create optical illusions, kinetic effects.
Architecture and interior design under modernism also embraced new ideals and materials, right? Serving people, the machine age.
Yes. Le Corbusier in France, especially post-war, was hugely influential. His Ronchamp chapel is sculptural, expressive. His Unité d'habitation apartment blocks embodied his idea of the house as a machine for living in, influencing social housing and city planning worldwide, rational, functional living. In Germany, Mies van der Rohe sought universal space, flexible interiors with minimal structure, like his National Gallery in Berlin, famous for the phrase, less is more. He also pioneered the Bürolandschaft, or open-plan office landscape. In the U.S., Louis Sullivan's dictum, form follows function, was foundational, and his student, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wright created a uniquely American style, integrating buildings with nature.
Incredibly so. Wright was prolific, hugely influential. His Falling Water House, built over a waterfall, is the ultimate example of organic architecture, blurring inside and outside. The Guggenheim Museum in New York, with its continuous spiral ramp. The Johnson Wax Building with its innovative lily pad columns and glass tube lighting. He also designed Usonian houses intended as affordable, practical homes for ordinary Americans, often using prefabricated elements. And then there's the international style, a specific, highly influential strain of modernism. Functional, undecorated geometric forms, large glass areas, flat roofs, use of steel and concrete. Think UN headquarters, the Seagram Building. Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson, Niemeyer's work in Brasilia. Very sleek. Very rational.
And finally, the furniture that came out of this era, mid-century modern, post-WWII, blending classic modern designs with new possibilities.
It was a fantastic period for furniture design. It built on the pioneering work of the 20s and 30s people like Alvar Aalto, Marcel Breuer, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, whose tubular steel and bentwood designs became classics. But post-war, new materials like plastic, fiberglass, laminates offered even greater design freedom. Molded shapes became possible, and Scandinavian designers brought this beautiful simplicity and elegance using wood, which had a massive global influence.
So many iconic designers emerged, Charles and Ray Eames.
Absolutely central. Charles Eames, often working closely with his wife Ray, was arguably the most significant creative force. They experimented relentlessly, especially with molded plywood, giving us the Eames lounge chair, an ottoman, maybe the icon of the era, the LCW chair, and later, pioneering molded fiberglass and plastic chairs like the RAR rocking chair. Truly revolutionary work.
And others. It's such a rich field.
Oh, definitely. Hans Wigner from Denmark, a master craftsman, known for chairs like the wishbone chair. George Nelson, an industrial designer, created playful yet functional pieces like the coconut chair and marshmallow sofa. Arne Jacobsen, another Dane, architect and designer, gave us the egg chair, swan chair, ant chair. often inspired by natural forms. Eero Saarinen, Finnish-American, famously wanted to clear up the slum of legs under tables and chairs, leading to his pedestal designs like the tulip chair and table. He also embraced molded plastic and fiberglass in pieces like the womb chair. Finn Juhl, also Danish, known for his sculptural, almost artistic approach to furniture, like the chieftain chair. Harry Bertoia, Italian-American, created his beautiful collection of welded steel wire chairs like the diamond chair. And Werner Panton, a real innovator, pushed boundaries with fluid, futuristic plastic forms like the iconic Panton S chair, the first single-form injection-molded plastic chair, and Eero Aarnio in Finland with his playful plastic bubbles and pods like the ball chair. Companies like Knoll and Herman Miller were crucial in producing and promoting these designs, making them widely available.
So, beyond the designers and materials, what were the key elements of mid-century modern style? What was its spirit?
There was often a love of natural wood, especially in Scandinavian design, but also an embrace of new tech plastics, laminates, aluminum, steel. Comfort and domesticity were important, sometimes reflecting post-war ideals about family life. Pop culture definitely had an influence, bright colors, sometimes playful or even outrageous forms. Craftsmanship remained important, with a thriving studio craft movement alongside mass production. Form and function were still key drivers. Futuristic design was big, inspired by the space race, think globe shapes, atomic motifs, sleek lines. Natural biomorphic forms were also popular, moving away from strict cubist geometry towards more organic shapes. Clean lines were still valued, but often softened. And color, from earthy tones to vibrant primaries and even day-glow fluorescence. Lighting became sculptural too. Think George Nelson's bubble lamps or Paul Henningsen's pH artichoke lamp.
Wow. What an incredible journey through these vastly different styles and eras. From Mesopotamia, where the environment literally shaped civilization and its expression, to the intellectual and artistic explosion of the Italian Renaissance. Then, the soul-stirring drama of the Baroque, the comfortable elegance of Biedermeier for a new middle class, and finally, the revolutionary rethinking of modernism for the machine age. You've really shown how each era built on, reacted against, and completely reimagined what art, architecture, and design could be.
Exactly. And when you peel back the layers looking at these sources, what really emerges is this continuous dialogue across the centuries. It's a testament to human creativity, isn't it? A relentless desire to shape our world, to express ourselves within it. Understanding these connections, these threads, helps us appreciate not just individual objects or buildings, but the grand tapestry of human endeavor. It shows how our environments aren't just passive backdrops. They're active participants in our history, reflecting and shaping who we are.
So, what does this all mean for you, listening? As you look around your own world, your home, your city, perhaps you'll start to see echoes of these deep dives. Understand a little more how the past informs the present design choices all around us. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What new influences, technological, social, environmental, are shaping our environments today? And how might our designs, our spaces, be viewed centuries from now? That's definitely a thought to mull over until our next deep dive.